Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Miller, joined, as always, by my co-host, Ian Cummings. And today, we're going to answer your questions. We have 16 or 17 of them here that we are going to answer. Thank you guys, everybody, for contributing to the Mailbag episode of the podcast. These are our favorite episodes. Listen, mock drafts are awesome. They're a lot of fun. You get to talk about the top prospects in the class. It's always fun to talk about the top prospects in the class. But your questions and your participation, without your participation, this podcast doesn't matter. So having you guys ask us questions, listening in for the answers, we are grateful for that. Without further ado, Ian, how you doing today?
Doing good. Mailbags are always my favorite. And, to be honest, I needed a mailbag to kind of brighten my mood because I got crushed by you in fantasy this past week. So that was
absolutely
fun.
Decimated.
That was just,
it's like your team didn't even show up.
I know, dude. I know. Sometimes you just kind of throw in the towel early, just, call it a day, right? That was what happened this time. But I'm hoping that I'm putting one of my better weeks in the bank with that bad week, but more likely than not. The peak has already been passed here. So we'll see. We're still in the running, but congratulations to you, hat tip. But yeah, Mailbag podcast. Always love these. Always love answering these questions. And I think, every time we get a really widespread, team-specific questions, prospect-specific, and process-specific too. And I think, all three of those are really fun to answer and dive into. So we've got a 45-minute cutoff. We want to try and get below. We're always very long-winded.
Oh, we're going to get below it. We are going to get below
it. All right. I like the conviction.
I'm going to, listen, if we start rambling or if you start rambling, I'm just going to, hurry up. We got to go. I love it. I would just like to point out just quickly, nobody cares about my fantasy teams. And for the most part, I don't care about my fantasy teams. But in the three paid leagues I'm in right now, I am 6-2 in each of them. And I have no clue how, because my points scored is middle of the pack. And my points against, it's just I'm playing great defense. I'm a matchup wizard. Let's get into these questions before everybody leaves. And we're going to start off with the hottest question of them all. What is the earliest a team should draft a kicker in the 2024 NFL draft? And this is from College Football Network's Ollie Hodgkinson. We know he is a proponent of the special teams. It's like a fantasy football draft, transitioning from one to another.
Yep,
you don't draft a kicker until the last round. You don't draft a kicker until the last round. I mean, maybe you go after Justin Tucker before you get a defense, but that's it. Nobody else should get drafted. Okay. And this isn't even about, in my opinion, the talent of these guys, because the talent might be there to be this guy's not going to miss at the NFL level. Let's take him in round 3, round 4. It's a bad idea because you are immediately putting an undue amount of pressure on a position that is already stacked to the brim with pressure. Because instead of drafting Jake Moody in round 3, you could have had insert player who's going to be an all-pro from the 4th or 5th round here. And they're going to have to hear about that forever, especially if it is at a position that they needed in the draft, which the San Francisco 49ers, right now, at the NFL trade deadline, could have went out and tried to get a cornerback on the opposite side of Javarius Ward, but didn't. They went out and they got another defensive end, which makes that defensive line pretty insane.
Yeah.
But I say all that to say this. It's not the talent side of things. It's that I don't think you should put pressure on a position where pressure can legitimately destroy your career.
Yeah, for sure. It's the pressure and it's the opportunity cost of missing out on a more valuable player in another position. Once I saw Ali ask this question, I had to put it at the top. Shout out to Ali and Cam. They do great work at CFN, as always. But, man, when it's a kicker, right, here's the thing. How many of the good kickers in the NFL that have stuck around started out as undrafted free agents? A good portion of them. Yeah, so it's I would, if there's a kicker who has a massive hit rate, if you posit to me, this guy's going to hit 95% of his kicks. He has a leg that can hit 60 yards out. If you know those things, yeah, I'll take him early day 3, right? I will use one of those priority picks on him in the day 3 range. But how many kickers come out with those guarantees? Very few, right? So I look at that, and you look at the past 2 drafts, right? You could have gotten – you look at that Jake Moody 3rd-round pick. Maybe you could have gotten Puka Nacua with that, or Tariq Woolen, right? There's playmakers at other positions that just inherently bring more value at those spots. So I'm sorry, Ali, round 6 or round 7 is probably where I start, right? I just think once you get to that point, the point of diminishing returns, is very low across the board. There's a lot of talent across the board. Try to alleviate the pressure by waiting a little bit and getting the best value at that spot. So, if they're really, really good, I would draft them there, but I would also peruse the UDFA market because that's ultimately where some of the best value comes there.
Let's get into the next question. And this one is from Brian Maffey, who is fantastic on Twitter. Who is your tier 2 of quarterbacks in the 2024 NFL draft? And this is an interesting question because he's not asking just like who are some of the quarterbacks below the top 2. We're talking about tiers here, and I think that's a very important distinction. I think when I look at the tiers, I think of the elite prospects, which is Drake Maye and Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
Behind that is like that, who am I taking from 16 to 32 in the NFL draft? Or maybe even a little bit earlier if the situation necessitates it. And so for me, I'm leaving out the guys that I would take him on day 2, but I wouldn't draft him in round 1. And I think that that's a pretty thin list for me personally, but how do you look at it?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's a discussion of possibilities too. Like there's a few guys who I have yet to regrade, concrete regrade, but could end up finding themselves in that spot. Jaden Daniels from LSU, I think, is a great example. He's a guy who we came into the season with a lot of preconceived notions about his draft range. I know Dalton's getting the dance in there. I got to get that in there. Dalton's been singing his praises since the very beginning, and it's coming to fruition this year. But he's got the talent. He's got the pocket presence. He's got the pocket ability, right? The accuracy. The decision-making, he's really been lights out this year. Aside from his frame, which some NFL evaluators might be worried how that projects, there aren't a lot of red flags with that profile. So looking at that, you could see him crack that round 1 range, I think, legitimately with the way he's been playing. So looking at that, what quarterbacks are in that tier 2 for me, I'm going to be a little bit wider with my net right now because we're still mid-season. There's still a lot of possibilities. J.J. McCarthy, right off the bat, I think he's QB3 for a lot of people, myself included. Young, he's trending up. He's got great talent. Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix are very close for me. I think both of them are really savvy veterans who win in different ways. I think Bo Nix, the off-platform ability has always been one of my favorite traits of his. But then Michael Penix Jr., the gunslinger who can operate from the pocket, the field vision, the accuracy, the toughness as well. I could see him being in that tier 2. So I think those 5 guys and then Jaden Daniels, I think. So that group of 4 beyond the top 2, that's what I look at as my tier 2 right now. And then you go farther down the list. I think there's visible separation from that group to guys like Quinn Ewers and Shedeur Sanders who might go back to school, and Cameron Ward. I think once you get that point, there's a lot of separation. So those 4 for me are in that tier.
Yeah, I think for me, when I look at the second tier of quarterback, I'm looking firmly at J.J. McCarthy. I think that he's, for me, the number 3 guy right now. And then, yeah, I think you're looking at guys like Shedeur Sanders, but I personally think Sanders is going to go back to school. That's just kind of the feel that I have for this. I don't think that he needs to go. And I think that he's going to stick around another year in Colorado. And it's because he can make a ton of money in Colorado right now. So, and he doesn't need that NFL guaranteed contract. So I think he might stay in school. I think Jalen Daniels might be able to get there. But I think when I look at this quarterback class as a whole, it's like, well, I kind of like a lot of these guys. It's like, I don't know if I love any of them. And if I don't love any of them, I don't know if I'm going to take that shot in the first round. But in the second round, I'm happy to take a shot on Jaden Daniels. I'm happy to take a shot on Quinn Ewers a little bit later in the second round. There are guys that I really like, and it was kind of interesting to me. I was a big fan of Carson Beck's coming into the season, and it was interesting to see Dane have him in the top 50, have him at 50. I haven't loved what I've seen from Carson Beck so far this year. I think that when you look at the package that he puts together, the arm talent and the pocket maneuverability, I think that it's all there to be a solid quarterback in the NFL. My issue is that he, in my opinion, has been wholly inconsistent, not just from a game-to-game perspective, but from a inside the game perspective where, for the first 2 quarters, he looks awful. And then in the third and fourth quarter, he starts to find his groove. Well, you can't do that at the NFL level. You have to be a consistent player, and I don't think that he has that consistency yet. And could he get that with a little bit more playing time? I think that he could, but I need to see it before I really buy into it. But the tools are there with Carson Beck to be a round 2 guy, in my opinion. So it's just a really interesting class overall. There's a ton of guys in that kind of range, but I think when I'm looking at that second tier, I'm looking firmly at J.J. McCarthy and Shedeur Sanders right now. And for me, those are the only 2 guys in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think McCarthy in particular, if you're going to be selective with that tier,
yes,
he's the top candidate.
And I always lean in the selective.
Yeah.
Kind of.
There are lessons from the past to kind of lean toward that, like the 2022 quarterback class, I believe, with Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, and we were trying to figure out who was the best QB of that bunch, right? And in the end, the best answer might have been punt on this class entirely and move on to next year, right? So maybe selectivity is a good thing, right? And obviously Sam Howell from Washington is one guy who's shown flashes this year, but we don't know if any of those guys are the guy. And if you don't have the guy at quarterback, that makes a big difference, right? That's not a player you spend a first-round pick on. That's a player that you spend a third or fourth-round pick on. So, the selectivity, especially at QB, is really important to have.
Is Michael Penix a day one draft pick? I think we kind of answered that already with the talk about the tiering. I think maybe, but for me, I think that because of the injury history, he might fall outside of that. And I think that he has been the best quarterback in college football this year. I don't want to take that away from him. But when you look at the entire package, the little bit of stiffness that he has in his delivery, I don't know how the NFL is going to look at his injury history, being a lefty, which matters. I just don't know if the NFL is going to propel him into round one.
Yeah, and this comes to us.
Do you have a comp for him? By the way, like I don't really have one, so
it's difficult with the left-handed quarterback for sure. And by the way, this comes to us from Lorenzo J. Reyna, who does some great work at CFN and PFN. So shout out to you, Lorenzo. This was actually from our previous mailbag. We shuffled it for this one. But I think for the first round one, real quick, I've said it before. I just think as long as the medicals check out, I think he's definitely in that conversation because the way he's played this year. I think the stiffness for sure is there. I don't think he's an athlete who's going to beat NFL defenses as a creator, right? And I think that'll set him, a tier down from guys like Bo Nix in that specific category. But I do think the arm talent is there, the velocity, the driving velocity is the term I like to use because it just gets to its mark on time, right? It's just very consistent with that. The accuracy, the window identification, the field vision. I think he's a guy who can really dice you up from the pocket. So, I think he can go first round. And I think the competitive toughness, the leadership, that'll just be a cherry on top for NFL teams who are looking for that character kind of monolith, that figurehead to kind of steer their franchise in the right direction. So I think as long as the medicals check out, definitely a good chance. As far as comparisons go, it's difficult. I think with comparisons, I always try to I've expressed my confidence in his play style. I think as long as the medicals check out, he can be a very good NFL starter, right? I think you're looking at the operational traits; those are there. I think the driving velocity and the arm strength is there. Stylistically, I could see him being a Matthew Stafford type, where he's winning from within the pocket. He's got the ability to adjust his arm angles and his arm slots too, and maintain velocity. And I think that's very important. He's shown that he can anticipate windows, and he's a gunslinger. He's going to take those chances. You see Stafford do that too. Early in his career, Stafford, one of his hallmark traits, the competitive toughness, gutting through injuries to finish games and leading comeback drives, right? I think still doing that, right? So I think with Michael Penix, the injuries are the big thing. But if he checks that box, for me personally, there aren't too many red flags that would preclude me from taking him. I think the athleticism, the stiffness, that's something that shows up with Stafford too. He's not a guy who's going to beat you with his legs consistently, but he is a guy who at least has the passable functional mobility to open windows within the pocket and give himself time. And I think Michael Penix fits a lot of those descriptions. So max high-end comp, Matthew Stafford could be the type of passer that he becomes. Now, he's got to stay healthy, right? There's still a few things mechanically that he can clean up even now. In decision-making, there are a few lapses here and there. I know that 2-interception game a couple of weeks ago, there was one where he just didn't see the guy, tried to force it, right? So you want to kind of limit those. But the gunslinger, the toughness, and just the ability to work and win within the pocket with your arm strength, I think a lot of those things match up.
In a much more muddled running back class than last year, which running backs are distancing themselves from the rest at the top? This is from Justin, I believe you pronounce his last name Hire, H-I-E-R. He is another colleague of ours. And I find this question fascinating because when I look at the running backs in this class, I'm pretty much just throwing them all in a basket at this point. It's so hard for me to distinguish between these guys because I think that even though they're all a little bit different, I just don't see a guy who I'm like, yes, I absolutely need this dude on my football team. And I like TreVeyon Henderson, but Henderson has the injury concerns for me that hold me back, especially at the running back position is one where I have issues because he's going to continuously take a beating. And I don't know if I like going after somebody with injury concerns as the first running back off of the board in that respect. But how do you see these guys? Because I know Henderson is our RB1. But like, where do you take a guy like that?
Yeah, I mean, the injuries is the biggest concern because he started out the year healthy and then he missed 3 weeks for an undisclosed injury that there wasn't a ton of press on it. He's back now, thank goodness, and he looks to be near 100%. But you worry a little bit about the durability at the next level. He's as talented as he is. For me personally, as long as he's back now, with the uncertainty joining him in this RB class, I'm comfortable keeping him as my RB1 because I know how dynamic he is as a runner, how versatile he is as a receiver, the complete profile. I think it's very good. But in regards to the question, I don't think there's a guy separating himself from the entire pack. I think you have a pack of great early to mid day 2 guys who are kind of in that range. And I think that's where they're going to be clustered. Last year, it was very easy and fun for evaluators because you had 2 guys who were very clearly above the rest. You had Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. We don't have that luxury this year. It's very, very muddled, I think is the right word to use. I think Justin used the right word. But, within that group, there are a lot of guys that I like. TreVeyon Henderson, if he's healthy, I like him.
Trey Benson is
Trey
awesome.
Benson, he's been really good this year, man. I think
he might be the guy, I think, out of all of them that has really caught my eye so far this year because I already knew that I really liked Henderson's game. But I think Benson is the one. I mean, Bucky Irving is like everybody's favorite running back, and he should be. But I think the one that has impressed me the most as an NFL draft prospect so far has been Benson.
Yeah, 3 or 4 guys. If we're talking about the performance this year that has helped separate them or lift them up the board, Bucky Irving, for sure. I mean, the dude is 5'10", 190 pounds of carnage. I mean, he's just breaking tackles. I mean, the dude is just so fun to watch. I mean, he's explosive, twitchy. The vision, too, I think that gets underrated in his game, but phenomenal vision, creative instincts in congestion, the reaction speed to kind of adapt as the play is going. Love that part of his game. So if you can get by the size, I could easily see him going a lot earlier than people expect. Jonathan Brooks, if he declares from Texas, has been very good. I think, that long strider athleticism is there with him, but then he's also got great in contact balance for his size, kind of wiry strength. He really plays well there and a really good receiver. And then 2 other guys, Trey Benson, we mentioned him, the volume back, who's really added to his receiving arsenal this year too. I mean, he's running routes out of the backfield. He's catching, contested passes on wheel routes on the boundary, right? This is a guy who's adding that to his game beyond being a size speed guy between the tackles, right? So I really like, and the contact balance is just absurd with him too. I mean, the guy churns through tackles left and right, always finishes forward. And then one more, Audric Estime, I think from Notre Dame, is another one that I like, kind of within that similar mold, right? I don't think he's quite as agile as Benson. I think Benson gets him there, but Estime is another guy who's just so freaking powerful at contact.
He's so hard to tackle,
man. It's so hard to tackle him. He's got good vision between the tackles. Again, I think the lower body strength is just what keeps him churning along, man, just plowing through defenders. And he's a good receiver too. He's not as versatile as a receiver, but as a guy who can catch beyond his frame, he's got body control, right? I think if you need to rely on him there, he can do it. So those are a few guys. And Braylon Allen has been playing well too. I think the agility for me is a little bit of a concern with him too. But again, one of those, really powerful vertical runners who can just churn through contact. There's a lot of guys within that realm. So I think a lot of guys who are producing, are they pushing themselves ahead of the pack? Not so sure. But within the pack, they're updating, improving their ranking within the pecking order.
And we're going to stick with running backs here, I assume, because which group of 5 player, Ian, has impressed you the most this season?
I'm going to try, I was going to try and subvert your expectations and try and keep you on your toes here, but Blake Watson is definitely up there. I got to say, and this is from Brian Maffey again, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, he's always keeping an eye on the group of 5 guys. So I appreciate your work, Brian. Appreciate you as always. Blake Watson is up there for me. He's probably going to be a day 3 guy, right? I think he's a little bit older. Definitely not the elite speed guy, and he's a little undersized too, so you don't like to see that. But I have a ton of confidence in the way he plays the game. I think the vision, the patience is one of the most impressive things in this entire class. He's so good at using those tempo and throttle modulations to stay in control behind the line. And then once he gets past the line of scrimmage, He's around 5'11", 5'9", 195, 200, right? So he's got really good contact balance. One of those kind of like Bucky Irving, where it's size defined. You don't expect him to bounce off of tackles and churn through the way that he does. And then a very versatile receiving threat too. So, the vision, the physicality, the versatility, not an explosive speed guy or a twitch guy, but I do think agile enough with his change of direction and fluidity where he's going to be a really good player. So group of 5 guys, he's definitely up there. But I think the guy who's impressed me the most, we can say, a little bit farther up the board, Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo has been phenomenal again this year. He was a ball hawk last year, but he verified 4.3 speed, Feldman's Freaks. He could go early to mid day 2, maybe even crack round 1. I mean, I think it's a possibility with a guy of his tools and his ball hawking ability. He's definitely been up there for me. And then a few other guys off the top of my head. I think Tulane's Patrick Jenkins on the interior defensive line has been very good. I think that he's a TCU transfer, around 6'2", 300 pounds, just absolute wrecking ball in a China shop, man. The torque capacity, the violence at contact is very fun with him. And then Colin Lacey, Brian actually told me to look him up. I knew of him. I hadn't gotten a chance to look at him, but I looked at him a little bit earlier today from South Alabama, and around 5'10", 190, I want to say. But I like the quick twitch. I like the foot speed. I like the fluidity on his routes. He can do those in and out breakers, and he's got great fluidity, keeping his speed through breaks and route transitions. Good ball tracking ability down the field. He's one of the receiving leaders in the entire NCAA. So I think a 4th-year player, not sure if he declares, but if he does, Colin Lacey, for me, very dynamic. And then one more wide receiver, UTSA's Joshua Cephas. We saw DeCorian Clark. He's back, but Zachary Franklin left for Ole Miss. I think Cephas has done a great job taking the volume. Not an elite speed guy, again, but another 6'3", long, lanky, lean receiver with great route flexibility.
Is that Quintez's brother?
I'm not sure, actually. I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure.
I don't know if there's many Cephases out there. That caught my attention. I was a big fan of Quintez Cephas coming out. And you said not the fastest guy in the world. Quintez was definitely not the fastest guy in the world, but he was a very good, fluid, flexible route runner.
Yeah.
What is the position group that you're higher on the most, Ian, and who are 2 lesser known prospects in that group that help you feel strong about the group? This is from ADI Avery. I love this question.
This is a tough one, man, because there's a lot of strong position groups across the board in this class. Like, I think as we've gone through this cycle, the depth of each position group has kind of become more distinct. So you look at that, man, like I would say offensive tackle, but everyone knows it's a strong
Everybody knows the offensive tackle class is outstanding.
I would say wide receiver because some people were kind of doubting that early on.
Dude, that wide receiver class is unreal.
Yeah, and then defensive tackle, I would say, but people have come around there too. So it's like everywhere you go. I think when
I look at this, I think that I have an answer, and I think that it's safety. I think that it's safety. I think safety is becoming a more integral position at the NFL level than it ever has been before, really. I think more safeties are playing on the field at the same time at this point. I think that you see guys like Bullock from
USC.
No, I'm Bullard. Sorry, wrong one.
Oh, Georgia.
Bullock and Bullard. Bullard from Georgia, who plays in that slot role, but is really probably a safety at the next level. He can play a little bit of corner in the slot, but he's not an outside guy. So what really is he? And we're seeing a ton of those guys, a ton of guys that play in the slot. They're you say that they're a safety. They're kind of a corner safety hybrid type player in that Elijah Molden type of mold. But I think when you look at this, there's a bunch of guys in that range, outside of the 100, top 100 that I like. And I think Bo Braid is a guy from Maryland who is going to continue to rise on boards. He's rising on our board. I think that he's going to be a top 100 guy. I think when you look at Hudson Clark from Arkansas, he's a guy that I really like. And then Malachi Moore just continues to make plays around the line of scrimmage. Is he a little bit of a liability on the back end? Maybe. But I think in the NFL level, these teams are finding really creative ways to use these type of players near the line of scrimmage, use them as dime linebackers. And I think when you look at a class like this that has a bunch of different types of players on top of, your Cole Bishops and Rod Moores and Tyler New, the guys who can legitimately play on the back end. Kalen Bullock is another guy like that. So I think that it's not the best class in the world because you don't really have that super high-end guy. But I think that you have a bunch of guys that are going to get drafted on day 2 and day 3 and be starters in the NFL for the next 8 years.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And another defensive position, I was kind of thinking about it while we were going through this, and linebacker, I think, has really aged well through the process. I think that was a position where early on we weren't sure who the top guys in the pecking order were, and we didn't know how much depth there was going to be either, right? I think this year, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. has really separated himself. I liked him and Barrett Carter coming into the year, but I think Trotter Jr. has really been the guy who's taken his game to another level and added that pass rushing element that I wanted to see. So he's the top guy there. He's really solid. And then there's a bunch of other players at the linebacker spot. Like, you go down the board, Jalen Ford from Texas, Tommy Eichenberg from Ohio State, Tyron Hopper. I know we're both big fans of him from Missouri, Cedric Gray from North Carolina, Edgar and Cooper, Texas A&M, who had a monster game this past week.
Hey, dude, Edgar and Cooper is the guy we just need to talk about him real quick because he ended up being number 1, I believe, on Mel Kiper's board for linebackers.
Yeah, I believe so.
And that was the first time he was really on my radar. So, Mel, shout out to the godfather of the NFL draft. This dude can play.
Yeah.
This dude can really play. I mean, he's like 6'3". He's long as hell. I think that'll be really good in coverage. But, man, he's just one of those guys, and he kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyron Hopper, where he's just a guy who knows how to miss blocks and make plays around the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
He's just always making splash plays.
There was that screen tackle that he made this past week.
He overran it so he could get away from the offensive linemen and wide receivers. He literally skirted 3 blocks to make that play.
Like he overran it to the
only
perfect
reason he
spot.
was able to make and the only way he was able to make that play is because he's got an 8-foot wingspan.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Like I remember you, me, and Ian Valentino. I was awestruck.
At the same time, we all saw it. You're a little bit ahead of me in my stream.
Yeah.
But when we saw it, we were like, "Yo, that was play."
Impressive. For sure. And then Dane posted it a couple days later. So, the entire draft sphere is looking at him, and he's a great player.
And that's how things go in the NFL draft. Well, I think that we can be honest about this, is that when Dane Brugler says that a player is a player, that player immediately shows up on mock drafts. That's just the way that it goes.
I mean,
listen,
when Dane says they're a player, they are a player because Dane knows what he's talking about.
Yes. And listen, we are very, I think, ahead of this compared to other outlets, just because of the work that Ian puts in, quite honestly. But yes, I think that most of the world waits to see what Dane has to say in his top 50, and then they adjust their boards off of that. Yeah. Whereas we respect Dane. Dane is like the reason I do this. But we have our own opinions.
Yeah, and I will say, as an evaluator, right, we're pivoting a little off topic here, but that's fine because it's a good discussion to have, I think. I started being an evaluator a few years ago, right? It's been not even that long of a process, but, you need to dive into if you're a young evaluator out there, you need to dive in head first and make your own discretions. You need
100%
to make your own analysis, your own grades, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to find your voice and find your confidence in your evaluations, right? Because I do remember a few times when I was just starting out, obviously you have a lot to learn. You see a ranking that, doesn't jive with you or a player that you haven't seen, and you see where he's ranked, and you're like, all right, I'll slot him in around 100, 120, come on, watch him for yourself, see for yourself what you see, write it down. And once you do that more and more, you build the confidence to have your own voice, right? So then you can see different people's rankings. And instead of, kind of finding a good balance for where they should be, you're like, all right, I'm going to watch him and see what I think. And it's okay. There's different opinions. So it's fun to find your own voice and your own confidence within the draft cycle. And everyone sees something different. When you first start out, that's a little daunting. But once you get your confidence and your voice, it becomes one of the best things about it because there's so many different outcomes.
All right, we have answered 5 questions, so we got to get going.
Real quick, actually, because I know we were talking about safeties. I know we have a question from Steve Heilmeyer down below. So we talked about safeties. Let's just get to that one right now. If there's a place in this class of range, a draft round range, that would be most ideal to find a starting safety, what do you think it would be?
It's around pick 75. I think when you look at this class, I think that you're going to find one of these guys around that range. I don't know how many guys go in the top 50, but I think once you get into that early round 3 range, I think you're going to see 3, 4, 5 safeties drafted within, 25, 30 picks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, that's kind of where the good players are stacking up. Like we talked about Rod Moore, Cole Bishop, Tyler Nubin, Kalen Bullock, Bo Braid, and then a few other guys too. They're down the list, like Hudson Clark, like that mid-round but 75. I think Tyler Nubin as well. I think those are the players who are really that day 2 range. You could pick Cameron Kitchens round 1, right? I think that's kind of where he's been training for some people, day 2 for others, but I think that's where the best value is going to be for the safety class. And there's always guys in day 3 who end up becoming starters, right? So keep an eye out on that. There's a few guys that I really like, but if you're looking for the most guarantees, the most guaranteed talent, I think that mid day 2 range is definitely the sweet spot.
Yes. Let's move on now. Next question is, aside from Bo Nix and Bucky Irvin, who are some of the top 2024 NFL draft prospects that have caught your eyes at Oregon? And we have another question right after this. Perfect team fits for Oregon defensive lineman Brandon Dorlus. I think Dorlus is probably the guy who is at the top of our list, or maybe second on our list for Oregon prospects not named Bo Nix and Bucky Irvin, correct?
Yeah, I think it would be him for sure. And this is from Cody Rourke, one of our former colleagues. It's great Denver Broncos work. Cody, appreciate you as always. Brandon Dorlus for sure. I think Troy Franklin, wide receiver as well. But yeah, I think those are the top 2 guys. I think Dorlus is just that wrecking ball. You can play him really anywhere, just that alignment versatile threat who can just pinch the pocket, produce power. Love to see that from him. And then on the other side, Troy Franklin, the versatile wide receiver. You can use him in motion, right? The speed threat who can, kind of sear through seams and kind of carve through defensive coverages with that long strider athleticism. I think those are the top 2 guys. But there are a bunch of other guys. I mean, I think this Oregon team is very stacked. I think you look at offensive tackle Johnny Cornelius. I think he transferred over from the FCS. He's been pretty good. The torque, the power is definitely there with him. Technically some things to clean up, but he's coming along. Jackson Powers Johnson at center could be a riser late in the process if he declares. I think, at center you look for athleticism, power, leverage. He's got all of that, and he's a finisher as well. On the defensive side, Jordan Burch has really been coming into his own. Another really powerful rusher, 6'6", 290, 300.
When you look at it, Burch has been, I think, a little bit more productive than Dorlus even has.
Yeah.
So for me, it's, I think Dorlus, in my opinion, is the more complete prospect right now. But I think if you're looking for the more dangerous pass rusher, I actually do think that you're looking more towards Burch than you are Dorlus. I think Dorlus with the entire package might be something that you look at higher, but Burch has been fantastic, and they're both absolute freak athletes.
Oh yeah, I think they're both on Feldman's freaks. I know for a fact Burch was, but powerful guys, powerful alignment versatile. You'd love to see it. Real quick, a few more names on Oregon's defense. Evan Williams, nickel. Angles and support can be an issue, but I do like what I've seen from him. Jeffrey Bassa as well, just really hard charging defender, super versatile. Kyrie Jackson, size, speed athlete at corner, and then Justin Jacobs from linebacker from Iowa. He transferred over. He just got on the field recently within the last few weeks, I think, and he's been playing decent football. So another long athlete to keep on your radar. But back to Dorlus, the team fits. What's standing out to you as the top team fits for him?
Well, as a traditional defensive end, it's the New Orleans Saints, and that's the only one, because the Saints are the only team that is a 4-3 team or a 4-down front team that is like, yes, I want every single guy that is over 280 pounds on the edge, and I want to defend the run and sometimes get to the quarterback. I think that when you look at him from just a versatility perspective, I think if you want him to play edge, if you want him to play a little bit of 4-eye, 5-tech, I think that the modern NFL, these tweener guys that are 6'2", 6'3", 285, 290 pounds, they're finally starting to find homes in the NFL. And I think that's kind of where you see somebody like Brandon Dorlus, where he's not a 3-tech. I don't think he'll ever really be a 3-tech. But I think that 4-eye role is perfect for him. And then on third downs, he can reduce down and be a pass rusher. He can shoot gaps. He can use that length and power that he has on a center in the A gap. But I think overall, when you look at him, I think that there's a lot of teams these days that can use somebody like Brandon Dorlus at a high level.
Yeah, the team fit that I've always liked is the Cowboys for him. I think, the way that they can move him around the front and the way that he can produce, pressure from a multitude of alignments. I think they have Dorrance Armstrong as a free agent this year. Correct me if I'm wrong. You know the Cowboys better than I do. But, yeah, I think Dorless, 6'3", 280, and you can line him up at 7-tech, and he can rush from outside. He's got enough explosiveness and twitch and power. But then at the same time, like you said, you can put him at 3-tech on passing downs or 4-high on running downs at 5-tech. And he can really go wherever. But if you want him to move around the front and stunt and kind of test those rushing angles, he's got the all-encompassing talent to do that. So the Cowboys are my favorite fit for him. But, any team that uses hybrid alignments that is willing to be flexible with those kinds of talent, he could definitely fit that.
What are your favorite cornerback and O-line prospects for the 49ers in terms of overall fit and talent? When I look at the 49ers, obviously you look at right tackle first and foremost, but you also have to look at left tackle because Trent Williams is already, I believe, 41 years old or something like that. He is already a senior citizen, and he's still one of, if not the best left tackles. I think we can now pretty firmly say one of, because Tristan Wirfs is not human. But I think when you look at the 49ers, you can look at whatever offensive tackle you want at this point. And listen, I think if you want your left tackle of the future and you want to go and somehow draft Joe Alt, like if he was available for some reason, draft Joe Alt, play him at right tackle for a year, and then put him back where he is comfortable on the left side. But I think that this is a fantastic year, especially for a team like the 49ers, who are going to be drafting 22 to 32, where there are a couple of right tackles in this class that could be day one starters and really good players. You're looking at guys like Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. You're looking at Fuaga from Oregon State. I don't know where J.C. Latham goes at this point. I think J.C. Latham has still been fantastic this year, but that Alabama offensive line has been atrocious, and he's shown some warts because the situation around him is not good either. So I'm really interested to see what happens with this right tackle group. I think Fuaga has been unbelievable. I've watched more of him than I think I've even seen from J.C. Latham, just because I enjoy watching him so much. But I think when you look at this, I think that the 49ers, from a right tackle perspective, are in a really good spot to replace Colton McKivitz after this season. When I look at cornerback, it's a little bit different because I don't love this cornerback class all that much. But in that kind of cover 3 Seattle scheme that they run there, and it's more complicated than that because they run a lot of Tampa 2 with Fred Warner as well, but it's a lot of zone coverage, and I think that there are a lot of guys in this class that fit that role really well.
Yeah, I think for offensive line, for me at the 49ers, we know they can develop talent. So get really athletic, really powerful guys who are people movers, who also have the recovery capacity to be very good pass protectors as well. I think in round 1, Talise Fuaga is my favorite. He's all right to me. He's a top 15 talent. He'd be an immediate starter, and he could be a very, very good player, very good starter at the next level. So he stands out. Kingsley Suamataia from BYU.
I didn't even bring up Kingsley.
A little bit rougher around the edges than Fuaga, but another super explosive, powerful talent who can play left or right side, so you can get him in the room. And then on day 2 or day 3, I have him as a top 100 guy, but Kieran Amagaji from Yale, another super explosive, 6'5", 320, arms super long. The dude is just an insane talent. He's dominating that FCS tape. And he's very good at torquing through defenders, and he's a finisher as well. So, any player who's got the physical tools to mold and reach that high ceiling and move guys in the running game and create that displacement that Kyle Shanahan's scheme is so important to his scheme. Those are the guys that I would target. And then on the corner side, you mentioned it, a lot of zone coverage, cover 3. TJ Tampa, Iowa State is one that stands out to me. I think the size, speed, explosiveness combination is going to be really fun with him. And he's improved his run support ability this year too, which is important. But he's one of those guys who's really comfortable using his long strider athleticism to cover ground and manage space on the boundary. And he's shown playmaking ability too at the catch point. So I think Juju Brent's similar to him last year. The explosiveness and the just absolutely swarming length that he has is really going to up his game later on in the cycle. A few other guys, Zy Alexander from LSU. I know the LSU defense has not been great, but I do think 6'2", around 190. He's another really, really good athlete for his size. Very fleet-footed cover man with enough speed to work downfield. And I think, if they ever want to play matching and man, he's got the twitch and the foot speed to do that, but the length to cover in zone as well. And then Kyrie Jackson, we just mentioned him for Oregon, the 6'3", around 195. He's got the speed to cover guys downfield. I think in zone can be a very good look for him. So a few fits for the 49ers there.
All right, we are at 40 minutes already, and we have about 7 questions to go, so we literally have to be within a minute on all of these.
All right.
Quarterback prospects that best fit Atlanta. I think that's a really tough one because Atlanta runs such a unique scheme offensively. I don't know who is the best Ryan Tannehill in this class. It might be Michael Penix, honestly. It might be Penix.
I've always been a fan of Bo Nix for Atlanta just because, you already have a lot of playmakers in place. I want a guy who can distribute effectively. I think that's been one of the things they've been looking for from their QB position. Just guys who are accurate, on schedule, good at working off platform on those design rollouts too. I think Bo Nix for me checks a lot of those boxes, and I don't know if they're going to be in range for JJ McCarthy either. If they're winning like 7 games, they might be just out of range. So we'll see. Bo Nix is my favorite. I think he is worthy of round 1 consideration with his talent, and then you look at his distribution ability. For me, the playmakers are in place. Just get someone who can get them the ball, and Nix, I think, checks that box.
If my Packers are picking in the 6 to 10 range, who are names to consider? Tackles, quarterbacks, cornerbacks. I don't know if a corner for me is going to be good enough to draft over Joe Alt or Olu Fashanu or J.C. Latham or Fuaga or literally whatever offensive tackle you want to draft. I mean, there's so many great ones in this class. And I think that you absolutely need to try to protect whatever quarterback is going to be playing in Green Bay.
And of course, that's the first question to answer for Green Bay. Are you going quarterback? Because if you go quarterback, you can't get a blindside tackle for them. That's the discussion, quarterback or offensive tackle. I agree with you. Probably not a corner. That would preclude me from taking Joe Alt or Fashanu. Alt's been my OT1. He's moved back into that spot, but Fashanu's very good too. So first discussion, quarterback. If not, if you're rolling with Love, get Joe Alt. I think that's the best option for you if he's still there.
Why are the Bengals so bad at drafting offensive line? I don't know. This is from Ed Smith. I don't know why they're so bad at drafting offensive linemen, but we looked over their track record earlier. I wish I could go over it, but we just don't have time. It's not very good.
Yeah, I think some of the issues for them, maybe they're the years that they need to pick a round 1 offensive lineman who's got verifiable athleticism and technical proficiency. They don't. Sometimes in those years they go for a round 2, a round 3, a round 4 guy trying to compromise, and they just don't put enough into it. But then when they do, sometimes it's the coaching issue as well. So I think it's a balance of both for them. But at some point, you do need to just sell out and put everything you have into that unit.
The Buccaneers need an edge. Out of Latu, Jared Verse, Chop Robinson, who is your favorite? Is there a 4th or 5th guy in the round 1 discussion? This is from Ian, Pat Mahomer, which is a fantastic Twitter name, I assume. But for me, I mean, Dallas Turner is the number 1 guy, and I think that he's also the best fit in Tampa Bay because they do drop their guys back in coverage a little bit, and he's somebody who can do that at a very high level on top of being a very good pass rusher and being an ascending prospect, in my opinion. I think Landon Jackson is another one who, maybe later in round 1 or early in round 2 could be somebody that you look at as a traditional guy on the edge who can put his hand down, but is athletic enough to survive in space as well, even at 280 pounds.
Yeah, I think of that group of 3, Chop Robinson is my favorite. I think for the Buccaneers, playing stand-up edge rushers in that 3 odd front scheme, I think he's got a ton of talent. I like Latu in that scheme too. I think he's very natural rushing from that position. I think the bend, the hand usage, all those things are very appealing. But Princey Uwin-Milan, Florida, is a guy I want to bring up in this discussion. Too. He's our edge 3. We're very high on him as a unit at PFN. 6'4", 250, super long. He's got great power capacity. I think one of the most explosive guys when he gets all of his first step. I think when you see that heat off the line, and then the bend capacity is absurd with him. I mean, the way that he's able to keep his strides long while surpassing the apex and reducing his surface area. I think all of those 4 guys, you could argue that Uwin-Milan has the highest ceiling, and he's also a very good run defender. So something I'm confident investing in, I would consider him in that conversation too.
Who is your tight end 3 right now?
Ooh.
This is from Durst.
Now, this is a good question, but I think it's assuming that Jatavian Sanders is already my tight end 2 behind Brock Bowers. He's actually not. He's actually my tight end 3. My tight end 2 is Ben Sinnott from Kansas State. I've been a big fan of him for a while, the preseason, and he's only produced this year, even with some quarterback inconsistency at Kansas State. But I think Ben Sinnott, 6'4", 245, I think he's got the rack ability that Sanders has to most of it, like 80% of that. And I think he's a more versatile route runner, more flexible route runner. I think he's got a wider route tree, very good hands over the middle of the field, and a really good blocker too, very versatile blocker. So for me, Ben Sinnott is that guy. What about you?
We got to go. Who are 2 to 3 day 3 guys who could end up outplaying their day 1 counterparts? This is from ADI Avery as well. Give me one and I'll give one and I'll get us out of here.
Shoot, man. If I had to pick one, I would probably say Daquan Hardy from Penn State. Nickel. Put him in the slot. I think it's going to be good.
Love it. Mine is Aniyah Smith, wide receiver, Texas A&M. Just get that dude the ball. I don't care. He's going to be a fantastic slot at the NFL level. As always, guys, I love you. This is Dalton Miller, joined by Ian Cummings. Goodbye.